Today's video was made possible by Masterworks, but more on that in a moment. Vladimir Putin has already conquered an entire country, and he has done so without firing a single shot. That's right. While everyone is talking about Ukraine, there is another country that has totally fallen under Russia's thumb without many people realizing it. So which country are we talking about? Exactly! We're talking about Belarus. For those of you who are not familiar with this country, we are talking about the last dictatorship in Europe. And we are not the ones throwing around their labels. The president of Belarus himself, Alexander Lukashenka, acknowledges it. Check this out.
An authoritarian style of rule is characteristic of me, and I have always admitted it. Alexander Lukashenka. It is better to be a dictator than gay. Alexander Lukashenka.
In other words, Belarus is a savage dictatorship. But why do we say that Putin has conquered them? Well, pay attention. On the 27th of February 2022, Belarus approved a substantial change in its constitution. It did so through a referendum with all the democratic guarantees one would expect from a country like Belarus, which is to say, none. With these new amendments, Belarus will allow Russia to establish nuclear bases on its territory, a territory where thousands of Russian troops have already been based before deployment into Ukraine. In political and economic matters, Belarus has already signed agreements with Russia to have common policies in matters such as taxation, finance, and industrial policy. The ultimate goal is to end up forming the so-called United State. That is, Belarus will end up forming a political union with Russia. We have told you in previous videos on VisualPolitik, the Kremlin has always dreamed of annexing Belarus. This goes back to even before Putin became president. However, the Belarusian dictator, Lukashenka, has always been very reluctant regarding this union. Now though, things have changed. You could say that Lukashenko owes his political survival to Putin. The Ukrainian war has only been the pretext to move faster in the annexation. It's true, Moscow is bleeding economically and militarily. The Ukraine war has been a calamitous decision on almost all fronts, but we have to be fair. As far as Belarus is concerned, Putin could score a success. The question now is, what would happen if Lukashenko were to fail? Better yet, what if it was Putin's support that brought Lukashenko down? Check this out.
Mass anti-war protests took place in Belarus, 800 detained.
But wait a minute, we're not just talking about protests. The citizens of Belarus are doing everything they can to stop the war in Ukraine. And yes, we are talking about much more than protests. Take a look at this news item.
Railway connections between Belarus and Ukraine sabotaged to hinder Russian troops.
We are talking about groups organized to make life impossible for Russian troops stationed in Belarus. And they are not just a few. At the moment, you could say that Lukashenko has almost all Belarusian society against him. The question is, what about his army? Think about it. A dictator like Lukashenko needs to have his armed forces under tight control. What would happen if he lost that control? Is it really possible for Belarus to fall out of Putin's hands, right at the point that it is about to become a region of Russia? Today, we're going to answer all of these questions, but before we go any further, let me tell you a little bit about Masterworks. I'm sure you'll agree that the first few months of 2022 and generally the last 2 years overall, if they've proven anything, it's that the only thing that is certain is nothing is certain. This also applies to the world of finance. To protect the fruits of our labor, most experts tend to say the best option is to diversify, or as they used to say, not put all your eggs in one basket. Recently, JP Morgan pointed out that this is diversification process. Alternative assets have ceased to be a simple alternative and are here to stay. What better example of an alternative asset than the contemporary art market? This is where Masterworks comes in. Masterworks allows people from anywhere in the world to access a market that, until recently, was inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Art. But is contemporary art profitable? Well, this market achieved better data than the SP 500 itself, including dividends, appreciating by a not inconsiderable 164% in recent years, from 1995 to 2021. The process works like this. Masterworks analysis team studies thousands of data points to find financially attractive works with appreciation potential. They then buy them for amounts ranging from $1 million to $30 million and securitize them by sending a public offering through the SEC. Finally, they hold the work for 3 years to 10 years until it is sold. If you want to take a look at Masterworks for yourself, we'll leave you a link where you can skip the waiting list and create an account directly at no cost. Please remember a very important point though. No one can predict the future, and past results do not assure future returns. And as always, when it comes to investing, be very careful. There is no such thing as risk-free. And now, let's get on with the show.
The Soviet Silicon Valley.
Are you familiar with a video game called World of Tanks? Surely many of you have played it, or you may have heard it mentioned on a YouTube channel. It is one of the most popular video games in recent years. What you probably don't know is that this game is made in Belarus. In Belarus, I kid you not. And no, it is not made by a US company with offices in Minsk. The company that develops World of Tanks was founded with Belarusian capital and has its headquarters in the country's capital. All of this is surprising considering that Belarus is a dictatorship with just over 9 million inhabitants. But we are talking about a country that is wealthier than it seems. Let's put it plainly, Lukashenko may be an abominable dictator, but he is no fool. Since he came to power in 1994, he made sure to achieve 3 goals: economic stability, peace, and sovereignty. And in a way, he succeeded. You could say that Belarus belongs to the group of former Soviet republics that did not even try to make a transition to capitalism. This can even be seen in its national symbols, which maintain the Soviet aesthetic. In fact, the Communist Party is still part of the government. Unlike Russia or Ukraine, Belarus did not even consider a privatization process. Today, more than 50% of its GDP is in the hand of state-owned companies. The state controls the most important sectors, from gas coming from Russia to the country's main export, potassium, which is used to make fertilizers. That's right, in many respects, Belarus is still anchored in the Soviet Union. And as you can imagine, Russia is the country's main trading partner. Given this scenario, many of you might think that the country has always been a puppet of the Kremlin, right? However, nothing could be further from the truth.
No matter who comes to Belarusian land, I will fight, even if it is Putin. Alexander Lukashenko.
Your ears don't deceive you. Lukashenko may be Putin's ally, but he is not a puppet. In fact, his politics have been very pragmatic. Yes, it's true the economy maintains a half-communist system and is very connected to Russia, but they have also received all kinds of financial aid from the European Union. And that's not all. In the purest style of Chinese communism, Lukashenko has also created special economic zones. This is where the famous high-tech industrial park, created in 2005, comes in. It is an attempt to create a small Soviet version of Silicon Valley. Companies in this industrial park are exempt from paying corporate taxes. They also do not pay any real estate taxes, and workers have a flat income tax rate of 9%. And you're probably wondering, so has this Soviet Silicon Valley really worked? Well, yeah, it has. To give you an idea, in 2018, the high-tech industrial park already had 388 technology companies employing 30,000 people. This is where World of Tanks was born, among many other games. This may seem like an unimportant detail, but remember that we are talking about a low-income country with 9 million inhabitants. This industrial park alone accounts for more than 1.5% of the country's entire GDP. In other words, we can make fun of Lukashenko all we want, but he has achieved not even what Putin was capable of, having an internationally competitive technology industry. And check out this next graph. If you look, you will see that Belarus is almost twice as rich as Ukraine. And this comparison is painful. Ukraine is a corrupt country, yes, but at least it tried to develop a democracy. With all its imperfections, Ukrainians have been able to enjoy a certain level of freedom. Belarus has not even made an effort to maintain the slightest democratic pose. It is a dictatorship, period. However, in the economic field, it seems that the Belarusian model has worked better. In other words, it has been able to deliver what was promised, economic stability. The question is, how long will it last? And we'll take a look at that now.
Duel of the alpha males.
In 1990, Belarus became independent from the Soviet Union. In 1994, they drafted their constitution and Lukashenko became dictator of the country. However, in 1997, the then Russian president, Boris Yeltsin, signed the Treaty for the United States with Alexander Lukashenko. This treaty was an attempt to unite Russia and Belarus into a supranational entity. And as you can imagine, this kind of thing that no dictator is very happy about. After all, every good dictator wants to be able to rule his country with no strings attached, neither inside nor outside its borders. The moment you sign an agreement with someone much bigger than you can lose the power to do whatever you want. Conclusion? Lukashenko said to Yeltsin, "Look, Boris, I will sign anything you want. We Russians and Belarusians are first cousins. We go hand in hand together. But let's take a rain check joining together into one state. Now isn't a great time for me. I have, a lot of problems these days. So let's leave it. Love the idea, but let's leave it and come back to it in a few years." And that was the position of Belarus for decades, until this guy came along. Exactly, Vladimir Putin. And as you know, if Putin gets something into his head, he cannot be convinced otherwise. By By 2019, Putin came to Lukashenko and said, "Alexander, my boy, I've been looking at some old papers around the Kremlin and it seems we signed an agreement."
Oh, yes, the partnership agreement. I forgot all about that. I signed it with Yeltsin, and you know Yeltsin. Look.
Alexander Lukashenka, or Lukashenko, I honestly don't know how you pronounce your last name. We have an agreement that you signed and we are going to keep it with Mother Russia. And that is how relations between Belarus and Russia started to go awry. We'll tell you about it in a video that I'll link for you in the description. But Putin and Lukashenko engaged in an alpha male duel. Putin threatened to cut off gas supplies. Lukashenko threatened to steal gas from Russia. Literally. He even went so far as to wink at the United States itself. It looked like these two countries were about to become enemies. And then this happened.
The people united have been defeated.
In the year 2020, Belarus called elections. This does not mean they became a democracy. Elections in Belarus are so fake that they don't even make an effort to hide that they cheat. In this case, Lukashenko was ready to win the elections again by no less than 80% of the vote. But in this case, the opposition was really organized, and the streets of Minsk were filled with demonstrators. To give you an idea, Lukashenko's police put more than 6,000 demonstrators in jail. And the leader of the opposition, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, went into exile in Lithuania. From there, she has become an international symbol. And I know what many of you are thinking. The Belarusian people have united. The dictator's days are numbered, right? Right? Well, no. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but Lukashenko is still in power. Why? Firstly, because he has control of the army and the police. It's kind of important. Secondly, because the economy was doing moderately well. And thirdly, because at the last moment, his older brother came to the rescue.
Belarus protests. Putin ready to send Lukashenko military support.
The outcome? Business as usual in Belarus. The European Union said it was deeply concerned about Belarus. Meanwhile, World of Tanks became one of the most popular video games in Russia. However, the year 2022 changed everything. Why? Check this out. The million-dollar question at this point is, are the Belarusian troops in Ukraine? Ukraine says yes. Belarus says no. No way. Under no circumstances would they send soldiers to Ukraine. And you may ask, why? I mean, Lukashenko is not exactly afraid of speaking his mind, and Putin has asked him for help. Russian troops have been stationed on Belarusian territory for more than a year. What's more, Lukashenko has just approved a constitutional change that puts his country in Russia's hands. So why isn't he sending in his army? Or at least, why doesn't he dare to openly say that he will? Check this out.
Defections and resignations in Belarusian military prevented country from joining Ukraine invasion.
This news story might not be true. It is only information provided by the Belarusian opposition, but the truth is that everything indicates that it is true. According to several sources, even the chief of the High General Staff has resigned. Think of it this way. It is one thing to support a dictator in times of peace and to beat up a dissident or two. It is quite another to engage in a suicidal war. It is one thing to be bad and another to be a fool. Although come to think of it, are there Belarusian troops in Ukraine? Actually, the answer is yes. Officially, we can confirm that there are Belarusian troops in Ukraine. However, they're not the ones you might expect.
Hundreds of Belarusians join Ukraine's fight against Russian imperialism.
Exactly. The Belarusian opposition is much more motivated than the army. Some have gone to fight in Ukraine. Others have stayed in the country doing things like this.
Belarus arrests 4 for trying to sabotage railway links to Ukraine.
And take note, because these are no longer simple protests. We are talking about a highly motivated and well-organized opposition. But that's not all. With or without troops in Ukraine, Belarus has suffered almost the exact same economic sanctions as Russia, and that explains news items like this one.
Belarus's biggest games company is leaving the country, and Russia.
And they are not the only ones. Practically all of the Soviet Silicon Valley we were talking about earlier is leaving. And with it, all of the workers are going too. We are talking about companies that are moving their entire workforces elsewhere. And remember that Belarus has no natural gas and no oil. Alexander Lukashenko is in a much worse situation than even Vladimir Putin. You don't believe me? Take a look at this graph. Unlike the Russian ruble, the Belarusian ruble has not recovered from the devaluation. In other words, they have suffered the effects of sanctions, but have not been able to make the currency maneuvers that Moscow has made. But not only that, unlike Putin, Lukashenko does have a very well-organized opposition. Who would be Putin's biggest opponent? Probably Alexei Navalny, who, despite however much support he has on the internet, is in jail. In Belarus, Lukashenko's main opponent is Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who right now is meeting with all the leaders of the world. And it doesn't end there. Unlike Putin, Lukashenko does not have the unconditional support of the army. It is difficult to know how many of people support him and how many would be willing to rise up against him, but it is clear that he cannot afford to play with fire. So now, the question is over to you. Could Alexander Lukashenko fail? Do you really think Putin can send many troops to protect him now that almost all of his army is in Ukraine? Or is it possible to do something from the US or Europe to bring about the end of Lukashenko? You can leave me your answer in the comments below. As always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it so we know, and I'll see you next time.